I'll start out with
Hello.
a little simple introduction then. Hello, my name is Gariyuu. A lot of people call me Gar. That works just fine. I've been messing around with Blender for a few years, but a lot more seriously in the past year or so. And I wanted to pursue trying to do some teaching sessions in the server, because I think it's really cool, but I also think similar to Dota, which I've been doing a lot of coaching and teaching with on stream, I think it has a pretty significantly high barrier to entry. And I think I can help alleviate that by providing a way to penetrate past that by like guiding people through the basics and stuff. So that's going to be my goal with these. I might end up doing some duplicate sessions over time, but for the most part, I'm going to be trying to progress week over week through the concepts that I've like laid out a little track for. So this will be session 0 today, which is going to assume absolutely nothing about what you know. We're going to go through every single thing from a brand new fresh install. We are going to be operating on Blender 5.1.0, which is the current latest stable public branch of Blender. You can get it from the blender.org website or off of Steam. Either should be identical. And yeah, that's going to be what we're doing today. If at any point you have any questions, feel free to unmute and speak up and you can ask. I will be going out of my way to try and take my time and deliberately explain everything. So hopefully there shouldn't be too much to be confused about, but we'll see as we go along. Box on stream, yeah. I will be streaming this to Twitch, so if I occasionally say something that you cannot or ordain what I'm talking about, I'm probably replying to some sort of comment on Twitch. I pulled my nose. All right. With that being said, welcome on in. This is what you will be looking at when you first launch Blender with factory default settings, assuming you've not launched it before. The first thing that we're going to do is make it full screen, and then I will go over the very basics of what you're going to see and what things are called, etc. So, the one difference between my screen and yours should be that you will have a little splash screen here that will allow you to access recent files. Because I use Blender to do a lot of not safe for work stuff, I have closed out of that because some of the file names are also not safe for work. So I've clicked out of that. But you can dismiss that window by clicking literally anywhere on the screen that is not inside that little box, and that will make it go away. Once you've done that, we're going to work together to make the application full screen, and then I'll go into explaining some things. So all the way at the top left of your screen, you're going to see the little Blender logo, and you'll see unsaved in parentheses hyphen Blender 5.1.0. Directly beneath that, there's another Blender logo, and it says File, Edit, Render, Window. We're going to click on Window. And then the third option down should be Toggle Window Full Screen. We're going to click that, and that's going to full screen the application. Now that we have that full screen, and that just for Windows, it gets the little bottom bar out of the way, which I like. I'm going to go over the basics of what's on screen and just talk about what things are called real quick. So, something I'm going to be leveraging throughout this little tutorial here today is taking screenshots and then drawing over them, because that's just going to be a nice way for me to be able to highlight stuff. So this area up here, the dark bar at the top, this is called the top bar. This thing, it's got the all these different menu options. So we've got the little Blender logo, which if you click on that, it'll let you open back up the splash screen. It'll tell you all about the current installation of Blender that you have, etc. You got File, Edit, Render, Window, Help. Those are all various different settings menus. And you've got Layout, Modeling, Sculpting, etc. all the way through here. Those are called workspaces. So this entire area here in the dark black background is called the top bar. The other section on the screen here, this area all the way down to here, these are called areas. I know, kind of funny. The area here is called an area, but these are called areas. They contain what are called editors. Currently on screen, there are 4 editors by default. You have the 3D viewport editor, which is this one right here. You have the timeline editor, which is this one down here. You have your outliner editor, and then you have your properties editor. And then finally, the last area on the screen is this little spot down here. This is called the status bar. It displays relevant statistics about things you might have selected. It displays various shortcuts for different things, etc. So that's the basic anatomy of what you've got on screen on Blender right now. You've got the top bar, you've got areas, and then you've got the status bar. So first things first, we're going to do the most important thing, the most important hotkey in Blender, which you may already know from other programs. We're going to save our little Blender Session 0 file by having our cursor in any of these windows and pressing Control+S. Whenever I declare and explain a hotkey to you, if I say plus, I mean you are still holding down the first modifier hotkey, and then while holding that down, you're pressing the second hotkey. So when I say Control+S, I mean you press down Control on your keyboard, keep it held down, and then press S as well. Doing this will pull up your little save menu, and then you can save this file with whatever file name you would like. Something to note about this little save prompt that will come up when you press Control S. There's a bunch of cute little features. One that I will direct your attention to immediately is there's these little increment number buttons next to the file name here down at the bottom of this window. This can be really useful actually. So if you feel like you are about to do something that may irreparably fuck up your file or project that you're working on, sometimes it might be useful to save it as an increment, which is basically just going to append an ascending number to the end of your file name. Things like that might be, I want to make my model more high resolution, so I'm going to add 15 billion polygons to it. When you add 15 billion polygons to something, it crashes your computer because your computer isn't able to run at light speed, and 15 billion is too big of a number. So now the file is like irreparably damaged, because if you try and open it, your computer goes, yeah, I'm not loading that, chief, and then it explodes. So incrementing your file names can be really useful sometimes if you are going to try and do some big changes. Those are the basic things we're going to go over for now. So let's go over more basics of stuff that's on screen. So as I mentioned before, we have the top bar here, we have areas, and then we have the status bar. These areas contain what are known as editors. So we've got 4 editors on screen, and let's talk a little bit about what those are. They are separated from each other by rounded corners and a very thin little black or like dark gray line of separation. You can tell where there is a border of an editor by these little rounded corners, but also by how your cursor will change to a little 2-headed arrow when you move your cursor to the boundary between the editors. If you left click and drag, so if you're holding down left click and you move your mouse, when your cursor is at a boundary between editors and turns into this little 2-headed arrow, it will allow you to resize or rescale these little editors. Additionally, all of these editors can be changed and easily modified. We're going to go over a little bit of how to tell what is what and just look at the names of some of them. So for every single editor window that you have in your areas, in the top left corner of all of them, you will notice there's this little some sort of symbol with a little downward caret. That down caret is to represent that clicking on this will open a drop-down menu. And this is your editor selector. So this exists in every single little editor window, and if you click on it, it will show you the same selector, and it will also help you identify what the names of the editors are. So you can see if we click on it in this big main one we have on screen that's the largest, you'll see that 3D viewport is highlighted. So this is the 3D viewport editor. Down here, you click on it, it's the timeline editor. Up here, we've got the outliner, and then over here we have properties. For right now and for today, in the purposes of the Session 0 tutorial, we are not going to do anything to do with animation. So the first thing we're going to do today is practice moving around editors in our areas, and we're going to do that first by closing this timeline because we're not going to be using this. This is mostly an animation focused editor window. We're not going to be doing animation today, so we can get this off the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our cursor down to the border between the 3D viewport editor and the timeline editor until our cursor becomes that little two-headed arrow that I mentioned before. When your cursor becomes that, if you hold your cursor steady there and you right click, it'll open the area options menu. Now with this open, you can click the join down button, and that is going to merge the top editor with the bottom editor, and that is going to get rid of our timeline there. Just in case you were unable to do that, or in case, let's say, for some reason you want it back, I'll show you how to add a new editor to one of your pre-existing ones on screen. So if you bring your cursor down to the border between the status bar and the 3D viewport editor now, if you go all the way down to the left corner, you will see your cursor become this little crosshair symbol. When your cursor is that crosshair symbol, you can left click and drag, and then you'll see that it gives you this little dividing line on the screen. If I stay closer to the left side of my screen, it will divide the screen horizontally. If I move my cursor closer to the middle of the screen, it'll start dividing the screen vertically. And this is just showing me possible ways that I could divide up the screen into two different editors. I'm going to try and make it similar to the way that Blender opens by default and have it be at the bottom here, so that I'm going to let go of left click, and that's going to create for me a new editor window. But you'll see it didn't come up as the timeline, it came up as the 3D viewport. That's because whenever you create a new editor window, it is going to try and duplicate whatever the pre-existing editor window that you've split into two pieces was. So we can go make this a timeline again by going down here, going to the top left corner of this editor window, clicking on it, getting this pop-up menu, and then going over under animation and choosing timeline. And now we're back to that default that we had. But that was just an example for me to show you how to create new editors. As I mentioned before, we're not going to be doing animation today, so we kind of want to get this out of the way. So we can practice that again by going down to this division, waiting for the double arrow to show up, right click, join down, and that's going to get that off the screen. Thanks for the follow, Dove. There's an add-on called Screencast Keys. It is no longer distributed with the official releases due to some limitations. Yeah, that's what I figured, is it's deprecated. Yeah, I also looked that up, Audie, and yeah, it's been deprecated apparently since like some version in Blender 3. So I won't use that just in case it has some sort of bugs or whatever. Okay. What the fuck is that little yellow thing? Oh, okay, that's just my monitor being weird. All right. So now we have only 3 editors on screen. We've got the 3D viewport, we've got the outliner, and we've got the properties window. So let's give little descriptions of kind of like what these are for the purposes of just getting a little bit more understanding. The 3D viewport is essentially your way to navigate the virtual 3D spaces you're going to be interacting with in Blender. It's going to give you various different views on it. It's going to let you move, rotate, scale, and otherwise manipulate and control various things in your scene. Scene is just kind of the overarching word that Blender uses to refer to like everything that is currently on screen. The outliner editor in the top right over here basically just is going to be a showing you the contents of what is currently in your Blender file. And then the properties editor displays various settings and context sensitive properties for things that you might have selected in your scene. And that's a term that some people might not necessarily be familiar with. What do I mean by context sensitive? So Blender has a large variety of this so-called context sensitive things. And what that generally means is that the position of your mouse cursor and what you currently have selected in Blender modifies what information is shown on screen, and it modifies what hotkeys do. So what's an example of that? For example, if I have something in my scene selected over here, that is now context that I'm providing to Blender's software. And you can see immediately that this has changed a few things on screen because I clicked on this cube. You'll see in the 3D viewport, this cube now has this little orange outline that it didn't have before. In my outliner, it now has this big blue highlight. And over here in my properties window, this little tab now says cube, and it tells me some information about the thing that I've selected. An additional thing is when you are pressing hotkeys in Blender, which editor your mouse is in will change what those hotkeys do. So pressing one set of hotkeys with your mouse cursor inside of the 3D viewport editor might do something entirely different if your cursor is inside the outliner versus if it is inside the properties window. So in general, that is one of the biggest causes of flaws and hiccups when people are first learning Blender, is they'll be following along with the tutorial and somebody won't have told them about this context sensitive property, and they'll hit a hotkey that their tutorial told them to do, but their mouse cursor was over here, or it was over here when it was supposed to be in the 3D viewport. Now your hotkey does something entirely different because Blender goes, oh, you're trying to modify something inside of this editor. Let me help you and do the thing that you want me to do. But your cursor was in the wrong spot. All right. So with that said, let's go into, or actually, I do want to try and make more space for comments, concerns, questions. So how are we doing so far? Is this all good with everybody? Any questions?
Solid.
Everybody all good?
So good.
All right. Cool. So let's go into some more little basics about specifically the 3D viewport. Let's learn how to navigate our perspective a little bit. So we start out looking at everything from this angle, and I'm going to start teaching you some of the methods that we can have to adjust our view of things in the 3D viewport. The first hotkey I'm going to introduce you to is pressing down a middle mouse with your cursor inside the 3D viewport is going to pivot your perspective around whatever is your current object of focus. So by default, we are going to have our focus located on the origin of the world, which is at 0x and 0y. This little yellow or green line is the y-axis, this red line is the x-axis, and we are currently focused in on the 0, 0 point of the origin. Middle mouse allows you to rotate around whatever you are currently focused on. The next hotkey I will teach you will be something we can use to change our focus. So let's go ahead and move our cursor over to this little orb here with this little black line pointing down. This is our light in the scene. If you can't find it because you've rotated your view into such a way that it's for some reason like off your screen, you can also select it by going over in your outliner and left clicking on it. So I can clear this selection over here, select the cube, and I can correct that by going over and clicking on it in the outliner as well. Now that I've done that, I'm going to press period on the numpad to change my 3D viewport focus. I'm going to make sure my cursor is inside the 3D viewport when I do this. I'm going to press period on the numpad. Is there anybody here who has a smaller keyboard or not full-size keyboard who does not know how to press numpad period? Okay. I'll assume that means everybody has ability to press numpad period. There are a lot of hotkeys I'll be referring to today that use the numpad. If you do not have a numpad and you don't know how to press numpad related keys on your smaller keyboard, let me know and I can try and help you solve that. But you'll see now that we have pressed numpad period, that is the hotkey that changes our focus in the 3D viewport. So now when we use the middle mouse to rotate, we are no longer rotating around the cube, we're rotating around this thing that we have focused on. Another hotkey that you might accidentally stumble into by doing this is the zoom in and out. This is done by scrolling your mouse wheel. So scrolling down is going to zoom you out. Scrolling up is going to zoom you in. Something that I can use as a little teachable moment while we're doing this. First of all, let's go back and click on our cube. Click numpad period again, and that's going to focus back in on our cube. Let's go ahead and scroll down really far and zoom all the way out. Eventually you're going to reach a point where you'll start seeing this grid here, which is called the floor. You'll start seeing the floor grid vanish, and then eventually your whole screen just becomes this gray abyss. I'm going to teach you why that is. And the first thing we're going to do is move our cursor over here, and we're going to make sure it's in the 3D viewport. And we're going to press N, N as in no. We're going to press N on the keyboard. That's going to pop out this extra little window that's going to give us some more information about things we're seeing in the 3D viewport. By default, it's going to be on this little item tab. We're going to move our cursor over to the right side of our 3D viewport editor, and we're going to click on View. Now, what I'm going to bring your attention to is these two little numbers here that say clip start and end. By default, the end of the clip, which basically means where the camera stops rendering things, is set to 1,000 meters. We can click on this field and it will automatically highlight in blue. And then we can add a 0 here and then hit enter to confirm that. And you'll suddenly see everything pop back in. So basically what I have just shown you here is that you can allow yourself to zoom so far out that your viewport settings are going to stop showing you anything. So if that ever happens when you're trying to mess with things, know that this is a setting you can come over here and change. However, keeping it at 1,000 is fine for our purposes. So I will also introduce you to another hotkey. For a lot of numerical fields in Blender, if you hover your cursor over them and then hit backspace, it will reset them to their default value. So once again, I will change this to 10,000. And if I hover my cursor over there and I hit backspace, it's going to reset it to its default value. And even though I've zoomed out all the way here, I still have my cube selected, which I can tell both by its blue highlight over here in the outliner, but also because it says in the top left over here in my 3D viewport that I've selected cube. I can just hit numpad period again and it will reset my zoom for me. We can get rid of this little window over here by hitting N once more. And then we can zoom back out a little bit so we get a nice view of everything again. All right, so another way that we can navigate through the 3D viewport is by holding down Shift when we press middle mouse. So Shift first, you continue holding down the Shift key, and then you press down on middle mouse. This allows you to essentially translate your position that you're pivoting around. It will anchor wherever your cursor is in the 3D viewport in space, and then it will allow you to move your view around while you are still holding down a Shift and middle mouse. Something that's interesting as well is that it will loop your cursor when it reaches the edges of the screen. So if I go and I move all the way down here, rather than being stuck and having to stop because I've like run out of space, I can keep going essentially infinitely, and it will just keep looping my cursor up and up and up. Same thing with if I go to the left or the right, it will loop my cursor through the edges of the screen. And we can use that to translate our motion in space. However, if I do this and then I rotate, it'll be like, uh-oh, maybe I moved a little bit too far. Same thing with zooming out too far. If you ever translate too far and you feel like things are out of whack, you can reset the translation of your perspective by just hitting period on the numpad once more, and that will recenter your focus on whatever you've currently selected in the screen. Those are kind of the two most basic uses for being able to navigate our perspective in the 3D viewport, rotating around your focus object and then translating from wherever your cursor is on screen. That is one thing I want to specifically note, is that wherever your cursor is when you press Shift and middle mouse is going to be the point that acts as the anchor for when you are using this translational motion. One other thing I will bring up now while we're talking about changing our views is the difference between perspective and orthographic views. So perspective is a feature of essentially modularity, in that it is not preordained and exact how things look. It's not relevant for our purposes right now, so you don't have to follow this as an example, but what you are looking at is essentially a representation of what things look like from a perspective with certain features. Like you're essentially looking through a pair of virtual eyes, but these eyes have properties and they can be modified so that things look dramatically different. And as a result, it might not be exactly true to form. However, we can resolve that with what's known as orthographic views, which are far more precise and mathematical, and do not have any of these flaws as previously mentioned of like focal length and stuff like that. So on our numpad, if we press 1 on the numpad with an object selected in our 3D viewport, that is going to give us the orthographic front view of our object. Similarly, if we press 3 on the numpad, that is the orthographic side view. And if we press 7 on the numpad, that is the orthographic top view. Another way that you can think about these as representations is by looking at this little 3D widget of axes in the top right corner of the 3D viewport. You can actually perform the same function as the middle mouse by just moving in anywhere inside of this little highlighted blue circle and then holding down left click, and that essentially performs the same function as pressing middle mouse, and it lets you rotate your perspective. And then similar to hitting 1, 3, or 7 on the keyboard, you can click on the various titles of the axes to snap into orthographic view. So orthographic view is just essentially a perfect view from a specific angle, versus perspective, which has a little bit more of a different sort of look to it. Other than just hitting 1, 3, and 7 on the keyboard, you can also hit a combination of control plus those hotkeys to swap to the opposite side. So,
I love you, and thank you for
as I
joining me on this
mentioned,
journey.
with 1 being orthographic front view, you could press down Control 1 on the numpad to have the orthographic back view. Same with Control 3 to have the opposite side, and Control numpad 7 to have the bottom view. Also, heart emoji, Morgus. How are you doing? 30 months. Hell yeah, nice to see you. Yeah, so those are a few more possible camera controls for looking at stuff in Blender in your 3D viewport editor. How are we doing, everybody? Does everybody feel like they're following along so far? I'm gonna assume that's yes.
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, pretty good.
Let's go ahead and move on to some basic tools. So the first tool that I will mention is the move tool. The way that we're going to access that is by having a object selected in our 3D viewport. You can tell there's a selection by this little orange outline or by seeing this blue highlight in your scene collection. One thing I will actually teach you right now is how to deselect things. So one way you can deselect things is just by clicking on any empty space. This will remove the selection highlight, but it will still keep in the top left corner. It'll show you what you most recently selected, and you'll see over here there's still this little light gray rounded cornered square around cube to show that that was your most recent selection. But it currently doesn't have the highlight. Similarly, another way that you can clear a selection is by double tapping A. If you tap A once with your cursor inside the 3D viewport, that is how you select everything in a scene. If you double tap A, that will clear the selection of everything in a scene. But either way, let's make sure we have our cube selected. We can hit numpad period again if we have translated or moved ourselves at all, just so it's nice and centered. And then we're going to hit G on the keyboard. Now, when you hit G, it will maintain whatever offset your cursor had in the 3D viewport with the object you've selected, but you'll notice now it will start to move according to that offset and wherever you move your cursor in the 3D viewport, and it will turn your cursor into this little like up, down, left, right little carrots. While you're doing this, you'll see information on the top of the screen that shows you the translation vectors that you are currently moving the object along, and you'll also see at the bottom along the statistics bar a variety of relevant little hotkey modifiers that you might want to apply. Either way, with almost any modification that you do in the 3D viewport editor, there are 2 ways to interact with it. You can either click right click to cancel anything that you have done so far, or you can hit left click to confirm. Once you've clicked left click to confirm, in the bottom left corner of the 3D viewport editor, you'll see this little drop down window that has a little caret and it says move. If you click that and drop it down, it'll show you more detailed information about the transformation you just created. Not only that, it'll actually allow you to continue modifying it by clicking on and dragging left or right in these sliders, or by going on and left clicking so it all highlights and typing in a number. That will allow you to choose whatever you want, or more precisely refine things. And while we're in here, I will also introduce you to some of the nice ways you can interact with number fields in Blender. So click on any of these fields. If you want to, you can do basic arithmetic inside these. So I can press Shift 8 to get the multiplication symbol and type in a 4 here, and that will multiply it by 4. I can type in -3, and that will subtract 3 from it. So you can do a lot of basic arithmetic. Similarly, you can change all of these fields at the same time. If you left click inside one and then hold left click down and drag down in a fairly swift but smooth motion, that will select and highlight all of these fields, and then it'll immediately make them all the exact same number. But then you can type inside of these and it will set all of them to the same thing. Similarly, I can select all of them and then just drag left and right if I want to use the slider function instead of typing in a number. Either way, if you've been following along, your cube is now going to be somewhere different. Now we're going to have our cube selected and we're going to hit the N as in no hotkey once again. And that's going to bring up this little information tab. We had recently had it on view. Let's go over on the right hand upper side of our 3D viewport window and click on item to have that pull back up. Now we can see that there is some information that has changed about this cube, specifically the location. Now it's going to have some sort of transformation applied to it that you guys have just done. Like I had mentioned before, when there is a numerical field, this is not universally the case, but in a lot of instances, you can just hover your cursor over it and press backspace to clear it to whatever its default value was. That is one way that we can reset our cube's position in space. However, I'm going to teach you a few other ways. So let's say we moved our cube and I don't want to do that. I can have my cube selected, and then I can press Alt plus the relevant hotkey we use to apply that transformation. So movement transformations are applied with G. So let's press Alt G with our cube selected, and bam, that's going to reset our cube back to the center of the screen. So those are two different ways that you can reset the transformation. So yeah, that's going to be our move tool. Once again, I will specify that its movement is specifically related to where your cursor is on the screen. It maintains that offset. So it might be easier for you to move the thing you're trying to move if you place your cursor closer to wherever your object's origin is. We will specifically go over what origins are and what they mean in Blender in a little bit. But for right now, just know that it'll be easier to move your cube around if your cursor is closer to the center of the cube, because then there will be less offset between it and your cursor when you're moving things. Similarly, however, as we mentioned that this movement is changing this location transform over here, we actually don't have to use the move tool in our cursor to necessarily change this transform. We can go over here and use this slider functionality inside the 3D viewport to change these transform values. And you'll also see that over in our properties editor, in the object properties tab, which is this orange square, which should be the one that's selected by default, you'll see that there's a similar set of numerical information over here that we can also use. And then same as before, if we hover over these numbers and press backspace, it will reset it to default. Yeah, we'll get to the 3D cursor, trust me. All right, so that is our movement, or basic movement. Now let's go over another tool. If you press R with a selection in your 3D viewport, that is going to bring the rotate tool. You'll notice that this one does not actually locate or lock your cursor into an offset. With the object, you can still move your cursor around, and it does not maintain a strict offset with the object. As you are rotating around, you'll see the information in your little rotation panel in both the properties editor as well as this little item transform panel change. Similar to before, right click to cancel or left click to lock it in. Similar to before, we can hover over this area and hit backspace to clear it. Or as I mentioned before, you can press Alt plus the relevant hotkey for that transform, in this case rotation, which is the R hotkey. So Alt plus R will clear that as well. And then the final basic transform I'm going to go over before I start teaching you little cool quirky things about them is scaling. So that is accessed through the S hotkey. So with our cube selected, we can press S. And once again, we now have the cursor locked into a offset. You can sort of tell, it does look like it's similar to the rotation one that it's moving, but it does essentially, it does have an offset in that the amount of scaling is relevant to how far away your cursor was from the origin of the object. But this is going to be making your object bigger or smaller. And you'll see that reflected in the scale, but you'll also see it reflected in the dimensions. Essentially what this means is your object has some sort of original dimensions. So by default, the dimensions of the default Blender cube are 2 meters on every side. However, since this is its default size, its scale in Blender terms is set to 1, because that means this is its default size. So it's easy for people to get these confused. Scale is a numerical value and does not have a metric assigned to it. So you'll notice that the dimensions say meters on the end, versus scale is just a scalar, as they would call it. It's just a numerical value. So if we press S here and we make our cube bigger, you'll see that these numbers don't necessarily correspond to each other. But that's because the scale is what is being multiplied against the default dimension. So you'll notice that if the default dimension was 2 times 2.28, whatever I have here, is how we get to this 4.56 value here. However, another thing I want to point out is because we have modified the scale and not the dimensions, I can't go over to the dimensions and hit backspace. I'm hitting backspace on my keyboard right now. You can probably hear me clicking it through my microphone, and it doesn't reset this. That's because we haven't actually transformed the dimensions. This is just a result of transforming the scale, but I still can clear the scale by hitting backspace with my cursor hovering over the scale there. Okay, so now I'm going to teach you a few more little quirky modifications that we can do with these 3 different tools. So we've gone over movement, which is the G hotkey, gone over rotation, which is the R hotkey, we've gone over scale, which is the S hotkey. Let's talk about a few little quirky things you can do with these. So one thing that you can do is press a corresponding axis hotkey when you are performing a transformation. So let's press G and start moving our cube around. If I press Z on my keyboard, it is going to lock this transformation to that axis. Before I press left click or right click to confirm or cancel the operation, I can change which axis I'm trying to use. So I could press X right now, and that'll lock it to the X axis. Or I could press Y and lock it to the Y axis. Similarly, I can go ahead and press Shift plus one of the axes. So I can press Shift Z. Now it's going to let me move it along anything but the Z axis. I can press Shift X, which is going to let me move it along anything but the X axis, or I can press Shift Y, which will let me move it along anything but the Y axis. So this can sometimes be useful for when you want to specifically move something vertically up in space. So you're like, oh, I want to move it up higher, so I'm going to press G to access move, and then Z, so that I'm not moving it left or right, I'm not moving it forward or backward, I'm just moving it up. This ability to lock axes applies for all of the various tools. So it applies for rotation, it applies for scaling, it applies for all of them. Now that we've gone over locking axes, immediately smacks the camera with a cube at 30 meters per second. Yeah, that'll happen. Now that we've gone over that, I'm going to have us do a few little basic examples of the next concept which we are going to go over, which is our transformation pivot points and our transformation orientation. So in order to make a good use of these examples, we're going to need a second object in the scene, and I think it makes more visual sense and it provides more visual clarity if we use another nice big object. So we're going to spawn in a sphere. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to have our cursor inside the 3D viewport here, and we're going to press Shift and then A. This is going to bring up our add menu. We're going to bring our cursor down to where it says mesh. It's going to be the first one. It's going to have this little triangle symbol on the side. That's going to pop out a little side panel. And we're going to go all the way down to where it says UV sphere. And we're going to left click. That's going to spawn a sphere. It's going to be hard to see though, because it is going to spawn directly at the origin. And it's going to be essentially, for our purposes, inside of our cube. So what do we do about this? What if I want to see my sphere? Frick, I can't see my sphere. Well, there's a few things that we can do. And I'll go over them in a few different examples. So the first thing that we can do is we can go over to our outliner editor, which, reminder, is in the top right hand corner. If I ever mention an editor and you can't figure out which one it is, you can always see the names of an editor by going to the top left corner of its window, clicking the little drop down, and then you'll see it highlighted in blue which editor it is. So this is our outliner. We can go over here and you'll see on the right hand side of our outliner, there are these little icons. One of them is an eye, one of them is a little camera. So if we click on the eye on our cube, it'll make our cube become invisible in the 3D viewport. Just to give a brief explanation of what the camera does, the camera is going to make something visible or invisible in the final render. So if you were going to render out a single frame, or so just like a still PNG or an entire animation, this little camera controls whether certain objects in the scene are going to be visible in that. But for our purposes today, since we're not going to be rendering anything, we just care about the little eye symbol. So we can click that little eye symbol on our cube, and that's going to hide it in the 3D viewport. Now, what if I want to bring my cube back? My cube's gone. I loved him. I need him back in my life. Well, we can go back to our little outliner window and just click that little eye symbol and toggle it back on. Similarly, if we have our cursor in the 3D viewport, we can also press Alt-H. Alt is usually essentially the undo modifier for a lot of different transformations. So H is the hide modifier. So if we, for example, click on our cube in our scene, so that's selected in both our outliner and has that little orange outline in the 3D viewport, and we press H, it performs the same function where it hides it in the 3D viewport. So that basically was pressing H on the cube with the cube selected, has the same functionality as clicking on this little eye symbol in our outliner. Okay, what's another way that we can show our sphere? Well, let's go over and select our sphere in the outliner tab over here. And you'll see once again that it is inside of our cube. We don't like that. So what if we want to see only the sphere? Well, on the numpad, if you press numpad /, that will turn off everything in the scene in the 3D viewport except for the currently selected object. We turn Volksy into a sphere with one key press? Yeah. And it will also center your focus on whatever is currently selected. You can undo this by just pressing numpad / once again. But this is a very useful tool for when you have a lot of complicated things going on in your scene and you go, fuck off all of these things. I just want to look at this one thing. Rather than having to go through your outliner and go, oh, I don't want to see this, turn it off, 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 or like click on everything in your scene. This is very useful for just, I want to see this one guy, fuck everything else. That's one other way that we can see our sphere. But for right now, I just want to have our cube be out of the way. So we're going to select our cube, press H. Cube is hidden for now. Once cube is hidden, let's go ahead and select our sphere. And let's move it over to the side a little bit so that it no longer has to be in the way of our cube. The way that we're going to do that is I'm going to press G, then I'm going to press Y to lock it to the Y-axis. Then I'm going to press 4. By default, this is going to operate in meters. So it's going to move it 4 meters to the right. Then I'm gonna either left click or hit enter to confirm that. And now I can press Alt H to unhide everything in the scene, bringing our cube back, and wow, now they are no longer clipping inside of each other. Now we got our cube and our sphere, and they exist both on screen at the same time. All right, now that we've done that and we've gone over a little more basics on how to show and hide things, let's go ahead and go over what I just mentioned before, which is going to be our transform orientation and our pivot points. We're going to start with pivot points. So you'll see at the top part of your 3D viewport editor, you've got these little buttons in the center here. The first one we're going to go over is this one that is currently looking like a little overlapping Venn diagram or like a sideways infinity symbol. This is going to be your transform pivot point. You can click a little drop down on it and see a bunch of different options, but I personally am much more of a you should learn the hotkeys than click on things on the screen, but I'll just show you that it's here. So what is the hotkey for that? It is period on the keyboard. If you hold down period, it will bring up a selection wheel, also known as like a radial menu. And now you can move your cursor around in this menu and it will highlight things in light gray. If you move your cursor over something and you left click, it will select that. Similarly, you can just move your cursor over something and then let go of the hotkey and it will select that as well. So currently it is on medium point. Let's go ahead and change it over to 3D cursor, and they're going to use that for an example. So what is the 3D cursor? We have not talked about this yet. Well, the 3D cursor is this weird little like crosshair plus white and red circle that you see currently inside of our cube on screen. We can zoom in to make it a little bit more obvious, but it is this little doohickey right here. That is our 3D cursor. It is essentially just a point in space that we can move about at our leisure. If you hold shift and press right click, you can move the 3D cursor around on screen to wherever you want. That is one way to move the 3D cursor. Another way that you can move the 3D cursor is with the snap menu, which you access by pressing shift plus S. While you have this menu selected, you can select a variety of things to move the cursor around. Right now, just for the purposes of our example, we're going to select cursor to world origin. So to mention that again, it is shift plus S to bring up the snap menu, and then we can select in the bottom left cursor to world origin to get our cursor back here. All right, so we pressed period. We changed our pivot point to 3D cursor. What does this actually do? Well, as the name would imply, it changes the pivot point for our transformations. The easiest way to show you an example of this is to select this sphere that we spawned in and we moved over to the right. And now let's press the R tool to access our rotate transformation. But rather than the sphere just rotating around its own origin, you'll notice that the behavior is different. This is because we have changed the pivot point to be the 3D cursor. And now it is going to rotate around the 3D cursor because that is its current pivot point. Similarly, it is technically going to do this for the movement tool, but that's less obvious because the movement tool is kind of not really caring about a pivot point because you're moving things around in space. It does make a noticeable difference for scaling things though, because you'll see rather than scaling around its origin, it is going to scale in proportion to where its current offset to the 3D cursor. All right, so that is one way to give an example of how pivot point can change things. Let's go ahead and try and explain what it means by active element. So we can hold period to access our pivot point radial menu, and we can go over and select active element. What does that mean, you might ask? Well, in Blender, you can select multiple things at a time. There are various different ways you can do this. One way is you can do by holding down left click and dragging, which will create a selection box, and then anything that has its origin inside of the selection box will be selected. And you'll notice that because I dragged this box over both the sphere and the cube, that they both get selected and they both get highlighted here in my outliner. However, there's a little difference. There's a little weird change here that's happening. What's going on? These aren't the same color. Well, that's what it means by active selection in Blender. So when things are selected, they'll have a highlight around them. However, the active selection will always have this bright orange highlight. And that basically means the thing that Blender considers to be the first and or primary selection. So if I click on the cube first and then I drag select and get the sphere in here, the cube will have this like yellowier, brighter orange selection. But if I select the sphere first and then add the cube to it with that drag select, now the cube is going to have the darker one and the sphere is going to have the lighter one. So period, let's have our pivot point on active element. We can see how this changes things by having everything be selected, but having the sphere be the one that is the lighter orange. Again, you can achieve this by clicking on the sphere first and then adding the cube in. Now, when we click the rotate tool, it's going to rotate around the sphere because the sphere was our active selection. But if we do it in the opposite order, another way you can add things to a selection, by the way, is just holding down shift. Or you can do it by holding down shift in the outliner. One thing I will mention is holding down control does not actually add anything to selections when you are inside of the 3D viewport, but holding down control while you're inside the outliner does add things to selection. And another little behavior difference is holding down shift adds things to selection in 3D viewport. Holding down shift when you select things in the outliner will select everything between your first selection and the second selection. So if I go in here and I click on the sphere and then I hold shift and I click on the cube, it's going to select everything in the middle as well, which is not super necessary for our purposes, but this is all just an example anyway, so it doesn't super matter. But yeah, we can see that if we have the cube end up being our active element and then we rotate, it'll rotate around the cube. So those are kind of the differences of what can be changed about pivot points. So let's go ahead and hold down period and go back to median point as our default selection. And now we're going to talk about our transform orientation that can be accessed by this little drop down up here or by hitting comma to bring up the radial menu. So holding down comma brings up this radial menu and you have a bunch of variety of options here. You'll see that by default, our transform orientation is set to global. This refers to the axes that you can see visibly represented here in the world. You've got your global x-axis, your global y-axis. And then if we wanted to, I could show you how to go over here and turn on the global z-axis as well, but we're not going to do that because it's not really relevant for today. Oops. But we've got it set to global right now. What this means is that the orientation for everything that is happening is based off of these global axes. So when we grab the cube and we press Z to lock it to an axis, that axis that we've locked it to is the global Z axis. But what if we change our transform orientation to, for example, the view? This is a really fun one, in my opinion. So now our axes are different. So we have our cube selected. What if I press G and I press Z now? Well, now it's the Z of your current view angle, which means moving up moves it deeper into your view. Moving down moves it closer to your view. If we press X, it's going to move it left in your view or right in your view. But what if our view is like down here? Well, it's still going to move it left in our view or right in our view. That this x-axis is just going to cut our current viewing angle in half. Similarly, y is just going to cut our current viewing angle in half. So you can see how changing the transform orientation will change what axes Blender considers to be all of your transformations are acting upon. So we can put that back to global for now. But those are just a few more ways that you can change how you're going to be moving things around. Let's go over the next little tool up here. There is a little magnet thing that is called your snap tool. And it has this little drop down next to it. We can turn this on by pressing Shift plus Tab, and that will turn on this little blue magnet symbol. We can press Shift Tab again to turn it off. You can also just go up here and click on it. Similar to like everything that I mentioned so far, you can just go ahead and you can just go ahead and click on things, but in general, I prefer using hotkeys. So you can press Shift Tab to turn that on, But if we want to change any of its settings, you do have to go in here and access it via the drop-down menu. But what does this do? This is our snapping tool. So this can be really useful for when you want to move things in specific ways. By default, it is set to increment, and our increment is going to be based off of the object we have selected. So right now it is meters. So you'll see that now when I move things around, it has this very jerky snapping functionality. But this can be very useful sometimes for getting things into particular places. And then at any time, if I don't want that on, I can just press Shift Tab to turn it back off. The final tool up here is for proportional editing. That's not really relevant for the things that we are tutorializing for today, so I'll just leave that out for the moment. Let's go ahead and go into a couple other little simple things that we can change around for our understanding of how basic things work in the 3D viewport. One other thing that I will mention for now is your viewport shading. So right now we are looking at things in what is called solid mode, which essentially is going to have everything be some sort of like solid color, which by default is this little like grayish color that's going to bounce some simple lighting off of our shapes to give them some amount of representation in 3D space. However, we can change this viewport shading by either selecting up here in this top right corner or by holding down Z with our cursor in the 3D viewport. So you'll see that solid is currently highlighted, but we can go over here and select wireframe, and that is essentially going to just show us the what's known as the topology of our objects in our scene. Topology essentially just means various vertices, edges, and faces. I'll go into that a little bit more when we go into edit mode here in a short bit. But we can go back and click on solid mode again by holding down Z again to get this shading radial menu. And then we have material preview. By default, our objects that we create don't have any material settings, so they're just white. And then finally, we have rendered, which is going to use our various lights in the scene, which we have this little default light up here. And rendered is just going to try and like bounce light off of stuff in your current render settings. By default, Blender uses the Eevee engine. I prefer cycles, but these are all things for the future. We're not going to get to that today. So you can go ahead and press Z and go back to solid mode. For our purposes, that is all we're going to be messing around with today. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what we can do with our objects here. And I guess I will actually, it's been a little bit over an hour. How are we doing, everybody? How are we holding up? How's the tutorial going?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
So far.
Nothing mentioned to mention.
Okay, hell yeah.
Good so far.
Yeah,
Cool.
really good so far.
All
Although,
right.
I do have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Like, it's more specific. You're talking about the possibility of focusing objects
Mhm.
while you have a scene full with meshes that could kind of, making things very messy. I was wondering, is there any tools that allow you to only focus on multiple meshes? Let's say you have multiple meshes, but you only want to focus on a couple of them, not only one.
Yep.
Can you do that? Can you focus on just, for example,
Yeah.
2 out of...
So you can use the exact same hotkey as well. So you know how I mentioned if we select on, so for the purposes of this, I'll just go back to exactly how things were when I was bringing this up. So I wanted to see only my sphere and I didn't want to see my cube. So I was hitting / on the numpad, which lets me focus in on just the sphere and hides everything else in the scenes. You'll see before when I did that, there was this light, there was this camera, there was the cube. Now when I hit that, it's just the sphere. Even if I zoom out, all these things are gone. We can actually, we can do that with multiple selections. So if I want to have multiple things perform that same modifier of get rid of everything except those things, I can just have both of them selected and then hit that / on the numpad. And now whatever I've selected is the only thing that will remain. So the answer to your question is basically just select the things that you want to be the only things left and then hit the / numpad hotkey.
Gotcha.
Cool. Okay, now we're going to go into a little bit of a deeper concept. but it's going to be very relevant for your ability to mess with things in Blender. So we're going to talk about the differences between our various modes in the 3D viewport editor. So by default, we're in what's called object mode. You can see what mode you're currently in by clicking this little drop down up over here in the top left corner of the 3D viewport editor, or by holding Control and pressing Tab to access your mode radial menu. So you see object mode is on there. That's the mode we are currently on. All right, catch you later, Nitro. Thanks for hanging out. But we are currently on object mode. Again, you can access this radial menu by pressing Control Tab. However, I'm going to be talking about edit mode. So you don't actually have to press Control Tab to go into edit mode. By default, you can just press Tab and it will automatically put you into edit mode if you have a object selected currently. But I want to talk to you about the differences between object and edit mode. So in object mode, you are currently performing transformations. Anything that you do in terms of movement or rotation or scaling, these are all what is considered to be like transformations that are performed on the object in a what's the best way to phrase this without having to get too deep into terminology? Your object's core principles, like the position of its faces, its vertices, and its edges relative to each other, are mutable, but in a non-destructive fashion. What I mean by that is I can deform this and twist it and warp it and move it around and rotate it, but ultimately I can clear all of these transformations, and my underlying object, the way that it was before all of these transformations, has not been destroyed in any way by me making these transformations. So I can stretch this thing as much as I want, and I can change its shape in all of these wacky ways. But ultimately, all of the ways that I've changed it are recorded, and they are, I can undo them non-destructively. It does not damage or permanently deform anything about the underlying object, because what it is doing is it is taking the underlying object's information and then adding some sort of transformation on top of it, and we can simply remove or reset that operation to get rid of that. This is not the case in edit mode. When you go into edit mode, you are now fundamentally changing the specific positions of vertices, edges, and faces of the object. And once changed in edit mode, that is now the permanent state of that object as far as Blender is concerned. And when you go into object mode, that is now what the object is. Resetting things in object mode will not ever change anything in edit mode. That is a big distinction to make here. So let's go ahead and select our cube, and we can hit Tab to go into edit mode. So in edit mode, immediately a bunch of different shit on screen changes. Don't worry about it right now. We'll go through things really slow. By default, you're going to be in what's called vertex selection mode, and it's going to have the entire object selected. So let's use this as an opportunity to go over and explain a few fundamental 3D concepts. So we can deselect by either clicking outside of the object, or we can deselect by double tapping A. That's going to deselect everything here. Let's go ahead and click on one of these little black dots at one of the corners of our cube. Then we can hit period on the numpad to zoom in and focus on it, and then we can zoom back out by scrolling down a little bit on our mouse wheel. So this is a vertice. You'll notice if you still have this tab open at the top, if you don't, you can hit N to open it up, and we want to be on the item tab of it. You'll notice that it has information, and it says vertex, and it shows you its coordinates in space. That is essentially all a vertex is. It is a point in space represented in Blender by this little dot. If you click off of it, it'll be just a little black dot. They do not have a size. They don't have a scale. It is just a point in space. Our selection modes in edit mode are threefold. You can either select vertices, edges, or faces. This is represented by these little selection options up here in the top left corner of the 3D viewport editor window. We can change through them by hitting 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard respectively. So currently, if you hit 1, nothing will change because we're already in that mode. 2 brings you to edge selection mode here, and 3 brings us to face selection mode. So let's hit 2 and let's select one of the edges. What is an edge? An edge is simply a vector drawn between two vertices. So it is showing you a straight line between 2 points in space. Because as we mentioned, a vertex is just a point in space. It doesn't have a size, doesn't have a direction. It is just a point in space. However, an edge does have a direction and it does have a size because it is representing a line between two of these vertices. Then what is a face? A face, when we hit 3, we can go over to face selection mode. A face is a plane that is described by the position of 3 or more vertices. Minimum of 3, there is no maximum. For a large variety of reasons, you probably don't want a face that has 18 billion vertices involved in it. But for the purposes of definition, minimum 3, no maximum. So a face just describes a plane in space, plane just being some sort of surface that is boundaried by the edges drawn between the vertices that are part of that face. So on a cube, we've got our 6 faces on the cube, and you can select them in the face selection mode. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about how to select things and look at things in this editor window. So again, we enter into this by hitting tab or by hitting control tab to get our mode selection wheel and then clicking over on edit mode. One nice little hotkey that may become useful as you're working on complicated topology is Alt plus Z. Alt plus Z turns on what's called X-ray mode and allows you to look through your mesh objects. So for example, let's say I am in vertex selection mode and I can clear my selection by either clicking off the object or double tapping A. And I'm like, ooh, this angle that I'm looking at my object with is really useful for me, but I want to select something on the opposite side here. Dang, I can't really see it. Well, rather than having to move your perspective over, you could press Alt plus Z to turn on X-ray mode, and bam, I can select things through the object. Now that that is selected, and I can press numpad period, and I can go over, and bam, I've selected on it. Similarly, another thing that is of interest to note here that is going to come up similar to what we had described before is, you know how when we scrolled really far out and everything disappeared, and now if I'm scrolling really far in, everything's starting to disappear? That is still due to what is called the clipping distance. If you hit N to pop out this little side menu, you go over to view. We could add another 0 here and you'll see everything immediately pop back into view for me. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter for today, but I just want to let you know that if you ever see things start disappearing from view, it is almost certainly due to your clipping distance. But anyways, I'll zoom back out, double tap A to deselect everything. That's just one way that you can quickly view things. Another thing that is really useful when you are making selections in Blender is if your object has symmetry, which is a feature that can be forced. It is a feature you can create manually, or it is a feature that is by default included in a lot of objects. There's a lot of ways that you can leverage that symmetry to perform various operations. So let's say I want to fuck around with my cube, but I want to keep it symmetrical. Well, if I wanted to do that manually, I'd have to be like, okay, well, I'm going to select this vertex and I'm going to move it here. And then I'm going to look at, okay, so I moved it this much on the X and Y. I got to like try and make it, well, it's going to be very difficult to do that. However, there are a lot of features and functionalities that can make this way easier for you. So up here in the top right window, we can hit N again to close this little window. We don't care about that super much right now. Up here in the top right of our window, you'll see there's this little like butterfly looking thing and X, Y, Z. These are your symmetry options. So if you enable these, you can turn them on. It will turn on mesh symmetry in these various axes. So for our purposes and for the purposes of most of the modeling that you're going to do, you're usually going to be using X symmetry. Why is that? Well, by default, people like it is industry standard to consider the front orthographic view to be the front of your model. Remember, we can access the front orthographic view by pressing 1 on the numpad. And as a result, when looking at things through the front orthographic view, the primary axis that we are exposed to is this red line, which is our x-axis. So by default, most people, when they're making something symmetrical, will use x-axis symmetry. That is just how the industry standard evolved. So if we turn that on, and then we, for example, select this upper right vertice here, and I press G to try and move it around, you'll see that the corresponding vertice on the other side is going to make the same exact transformations. I can hit right click to cancel that. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet, but is default to a lot of programs, is like, let's say I moved this and I don't like it. Uh-oh, I left clicked, I confirmed it. Fuck, what do I do? There's a variety of different ways that you can do this, but my default is to use the hotkey, which is Control Z. That is your undo hotkey. Similarly, Control Shift Z is your redo hotkey. This is very similar hotkeys from other programs if you've used any other programs before. But we're in session 0, so I'm making no assumptions about previous knowledge. Similarly, with our other symmetries, they essentially are all just corresponding to axes. So now if I turn on Y symmetry, you'll see across the Y axis, it now will move the corresponding vertice across that axis. And if I turn on Z symmetry, it will move the corresponding vertice across this Z axis, which again is not currently visible, but I can turn it on for the purposes of this little demonstration here. So symmetry, very, very useful when making transformations. However, I do also want to show you that while your object is currently symmetrical, you can use what's known as the mirror function to mirror specific transformations that you've made. So let's go ahead and click on one of these vertices here. Again, I'm going to use the 1 on the numpad to have the front orthographic view. And then I will press G. And well, first I'm going to turn off all my various symmetries up here. So I'm going to have them all gray. So all of it is off. I'm going to press G. I'm going to move this vertice over here. And now I'm going to have this wacky little vertice that I've moved to a weird spot. Now with that vertice still selected, I'm going to press Control, Shift, and then M. Okay, never mind. I won't, because I've already fucked it up. Actually, that's a really good example. So why did that not work? It's because I'm using things in the wrong order of operations, because I was trying to show you how to mirror a selection, but I had already removed symmetry from my object, so trying to mirror the selection didn't work. So you can hit Control Z to undo that transformation. And I'll show you what I was trying to show you, but I showed you it out of order. So with this corner selected, we can press Control plus Shift plus M, and that is going to mirror the selection. By default, it's going to mirror it over the x-axis, but in this little drop down we will see over here, we can choose which axis it mirrors our selection over. So if we have it over x-axis and we look at things from the front orthographic view, it's going to mirror our selection from here over the x-axis over to here. If we have it mirror across the y-axis, we can see from the side orthographic view, 3 on the numpad, it's going to mirror it over the y-axis. And then if we change it to z, we can see from our, well, I guess looking at it from the top orthographic view is not very helpful. So we'll look at it from the front. If we click on it on the z, it's going to flip it over the z-axis. However, we can also checkbox this little extend option, which rather than deselecting our original selection, it's going and selecting the mirror that we've chosen across the axis, it's going to add that to the selection. So this can be really useful for when you're trying to select specifically specific mirrored vertices. But that's just another little hotkey that I'm trying to show you. To once again go over my mistake and reiterate why that didn't work, it was because that function that I just showed you, Control Shift M, which selects the mirror of whatever your current selection is, that only works if your object is currently symmetrical. So what I had done before is I tried to show you that, like, oh, I'm going to move this here. But now that I have this selected and I've made it unsymmetrical across the x-axis, if I try and mirror that, it's going to say failed. And that's because it doesn't know what Blender is going to do is it tries to take this vertice and it tries to take its coordinates and it tries to add a negative sign to the x-axis here. And then it's looking for a vertice there at these exact coordinates, but with the inversion of the x-axis. And it goes, there ain't anything there, chief. I can't mirror your selection for you. Have a nice day. So that was just me trying to show an example out of order, but I wanted to reiterate why that didn't work, because I think if I make mistakes, which everybody does, it's important to emphasize why and try and explain them. I think the most important thing you can do when learning is be as comfortable as you can be with fucking stuff up, and construct a mental space for yourself where this promotes curiosity rather than frustration. The As somebody who has worked on art for years, as somebody who's been really invested in learning Blender and other forms of like 2D art as well, I'm very frequently encountering I very frequently encounter people asking me like, "Oh, what would you recommend to somebody who's trying to learn this? Like, oh, do you have a particular like course or maybe a book, or did you study this kind of anatomy or this kind, or what do you think of this historical artist? Should I copy from this guy, or should I learn?" And like, what tools should I buy? Should I get this fancy tablet or whatever? Like, my answer to all of these things kind of isn't related to art, and it kind of universally applies to every sort of skill you might want to learn in life. And I'm sorry for this tangent, but I do really think this is important. I think far more important than what specific course you take or the route that you are guiding yourself through on your learning journey, I think the first and most devastating roadblock you're going to hit isn't going to be you chose the wrong course. It's not going to be your tablet isn't fancy enough. It's not going to be any of these things. It's going to be yourself. It is going to be your internal state of affairs. It's going to be your motivation. It's going to be your emotional stability. It's going to be your confidence. It's going to be something internal to yourself. And that is what's going to make you stop. That's what's going to cause you to fail to build a habit or a routine. That's what's going to make you quit. It's not going to be the course you chose. It's not going to be the tablet you picked. It's going to be because you aren't being kind to yourself. You're not giving yourself the grace to fail. You're not creating an environment that encourages yourself to learn and to grow and to make mistakes, learn from them, and re-implement this new knowledge into blossoming into a like greater understanding of whatever you're working on. So I desperately, desperately encourage you to do the emotional labor required to figure these things out for yourself. If you find yourself making a mistake and you feel a spark of frustration, I don't want you to just master that and try and calm down. I want you to interrogate that. I want you to try and figure out on a deeper level than just, oh, I felt upset. Why did you feel upset? Oh, well, because I didn't figure it out, and like, oh, this other person who's here with me, they already figured it out, or I didn't figure it out and I expected that I would, or like and then, okay, why did you have that expectation? Why did it frustrate you that the other person figured it out faster? Like, do the multiple deeper levels of interrogating that emotion and try and come to a better understanding of why you felt that way, and try and think for yourself, is that good? Is that the response that I want to this stimuli? Is that how I want to react to this? If the answer is yes, then cool, move on. If the answer is, I don't think that's the best way to respond to that thing, then try and internalize that. Try and think about that. Try and think about how would I prefer to react next time? In an ideal world, if I encounter this frustration again, how would I want to treat myself? And for a lot of people that I know, it's really hard for them to view things through a lens of their own self-actualization. So I encourage you to leverage piloting things through your favorite OC or your best friend or whatever. If that is a better way for you to treat yourself better, don't ask yourself, how should I feel in this instance? Ask yourself, if this was my friend I was teaching, or if this is my little scrimblow baby OC that I was teaching this thing, how would I treat them if they messed something up or if they made a mistake? Would I get frustrated at them? Would I want them to be angry or upset with themselves? And just treat yourself better, like in general. That is the best advice I can give you for trying to develop skills like this, is do the work to become a better you. And that will help you learn Blender the fastest, or art the fastest, or whatever skill you are working towards. Because the first thing you're going to run into as a brick wall of challenge to get over isn't going to be you bought the wrong art book. It's not going to be because you didn't buy the $4,000 tablet. It's going to be because you're going to be sitting there at 3 p.m. on a Saturday being like, I fucking suck at this, dude. Everything I make is dog shit. I hate this. Why the fuck am I trying? And that is going to be your quit moment. And me trying to tell you, oh, well, use this YouTube series or you should buy this tablet is going to be irrelevant because you haven't solved the problems inside your own head that are going to be the actual challenge to overcome. And I think one of the best ways to work through those problems is to embrace community, and it's to surround yourself with other people who do have a positive outlook or are working to make their outlook more positive, who are invested in whatever you're working on and are excited to learn and excited to share what they've learned and excited to work on new ideas and stuff. Anyways, tangent aside, just wanted to bring that up because I really do think that is a critical and important part of learning this skill, but also kind of any other skill. Okay, so back to working in the editor in the 3D viewport. We've gone over our various little selection modes. You got 1, 2, 3 for edges, faces, vertices. We've gone over the fact that it is different to object mode. We've gone over mirroring our selection or turning on symmetry. But let's go ahead and just give ourselves a little example of like what I mean by messing with things in edit mode is fundamentally different to messing with things in object mode. So we can go back over to object mode here, and by hitting tab or by hitting control tab to bring up our radial mode selector and going back to object mode, and we can grab our cube and we can press S, we can press Z, and we can scale our cube, and we can, for example, press 2 here. And that's going to scale our cube on the z-axis by 2. And you'll see that our dimensions of our cube says 4 on the z-axis here. However, let's go ahead and press Alt-S to clear that, or once again, we can go over here on the scale and we can hit backspace, or we could always just hit Control-Z to undo it. All various ways of undoing that. Let's undo that, and then let's go ahead and hit Tab to go back in edit mode. We can hit 3 to be on face selection. We can hit A to select everything. We can hit S to scale, and we can hit Z to lock it to the Z-axis. Then we can hit 2 once again, and we can lock that in. And now it essentially looks exactly the same as what we did in object mode here. However, the one thing that I want to point out is notice how the scale says 1. This is the fundamental difference that I'm talking about. So in both instances, our dimensions of our object changed. Like that was reflected in what Blender sees. However, when we did it in edit mode, that is now like permanent. As far as Blender is concerned, this is unaltered. It has not changed its location. It has not changed its rotation. It has not changed its scale. For another example of this, let's go ahead and go back into edit mode. Let's hit A to select everything. So if your thing already wasn't selected, we hit A to select everything. Let's hit G and then hit Y. And then hit, we can hit actually -2. Oh, oops. G, Y, -2. Now, if we hit tab and go back to object mode, see, similarly, location, everything is 0. As far as Blender is concerned, this has not been modified because we did it in edit mode. Similarly, if we select everything, we rotate it. Let's rotate it on the X axis and hit 90 degrees. Hit enter. Hit tab, go back to object mode. No rotation has happened. Interesting. So this is one of the fundamental things I really wanted to point out about differences between object and edit mode is in object mode, any transformations you make are transformations that are essentially being applied against whatever the default position of your object is in all of these forms. However, in edit mode, you are changing the fundamental underlying structure, the underlying topology, as it's referred to in 3D spaces. You're changing the underlying topology of the object, which means as far as Blender is concerned, once you go back to object mode, it says, okay, boss, that is the default state of this thing because you have edited it in edit mode. If we want to revert all of those changes, you could just spam Control-Z, but honestly, one of the fastest ways is just respawn the default cube. And I'll show you how to do that by teaching you another hotkey for deleting stuff. So with our cube selected, we can press X, which is the hotkey for delete. It's going to bring up a little prompt that says delete selected objects. We can hit delete. That's going to get rid of our cube. Now, if we press Shift A to bring up our add menu again, we can just go to mesh, click cube, bam, our sun default Blender cube is back. However, another thing I wanted to point out here, if you hit X, delete this cube again. Yeah, I can kill Volksy with one key press. It's really easy. If you delete the box again, the one thing I want to point out is that when you add something to the 3D viewport, it gets added into the scene wherever your 3D cursor is. So if we hold Shift and press right click, that allows us to move our 3D cursor around the screen. Let's just move it somewhere, anywhere that's not this little origin point. And now if we press Shift A and we add a cube into the scene, you'll see, wow, it shows up wherever we put our 3D cursor. So what's interesting about this is that even though it showed up over here, this position is reflected in the object's transformations. So we can actually take this object and just press Alt G, and that's just going to reset it to the world origin. Why is that? Well, even though we have our 3D cursor here, when you spawn something in, its origin is always going to be at the world origin. Origin basically just means the 0, point for every one of the axes. And for our cube, it is represented by this little orange dot in its center. However, this is a feature that we can change. So let's press Shift S and let's do cursor to world origin. Once again, Shift S is our snap radial menu for our 3D cursor. We're just going to snap it back to the world origin, just set it back to its default position. But let's try and mess around with our cube's origin and see what we can do with that. So with our cube selected, we're going to hit Tab to go back into edit mode. And double tap A to clear all of our selections, or just click off of our object to clear our selection. We're gonna hit 3 to make sure we're in face mode. And then we can either use middle mouse to rotate our view, or we can hit Control plus 7 on the numpad to view orthographically from the bottom. I'm just gonna use middle mouse to look towards the bottom. And we're gonna select the bottom face on this cube. Now that we've selected this face, we can go up to, or actually now that we selected this face, we want to move the 3D cursor so that it is on this face. How we can do that is once again by selecting our 3D cursor snap menu, Shift plus S, and now we can do cursor to selected. That is going to bring the cursor down to the very center of our selection, which for the purpose of this face is the very center of this bottom face. Now, if I hit Tab and go back to object mode, and now with this cube selected, I can go up to object and I can go down to the set origin pop-out window, and then I can click origin to 3D cursor. And when I do this, you'll see that little orange dot that is currently at the world origin in the center of our cube. Bam, it's going to snap down to go be where our 3D cursor is. And what's interesting about this is that is now reflected in our transform. So if I press Alt G to clear our movement transformations, that's going to snap it up so that our origin is once again back at the 0, 0. So that's one of the faster ways to get this default cube to be flush with the floor, is by changing its origin and moving it up like that. However, one other thing you'll notice is that if we have still our pivot point be medium point and our orientation be our transform orientation global, if we try and rotate, now we are rotating, instead of around the center of the cube, we are rotating around this origin, which is in the bottom face. So what if we want to reset the cube's origin? Well, we can just click on the object tab up here with our cube selected, go to set origin, and then we can click origin to geometry. That is going to put the origin back in the center of whatever our selected object is. However, as you can see, that is still going to have that is going to once again change our transform so that now it is considered to be moved upward 1 meter. So, well, that sucks. What if we want our origin to be at the same center point of the cube, but we want our cube to be level with this floor plane? We don't want our cube to be halfway clipped through the floor. Well, that means we're going to have to change the cube's position in edit mode, because as I said, object mode is just a non-destructive transformation that can mutate the features of the object, like its position, rotation, scale, etc. But ultimately, it will reflect whatever has been set as like the defaults of the object in edit mode. So if we go into edit mode, we press A to select everything on our cube. We press G For movement, we press Z to lock it to the Z axis, and we press 1 to move it up by 1 meter. Then we can left click to confirm that, hit tab to go back to object mode. That will move our cube up, and it will still say all of our various things about the location, rotation, and scale are set to 0. However, you still will have this problem with the orientation of the rotation and stuff being set around the origin. But that is okay, because now, as far as Blender is concerned, we have everything set to 0 here. That's just a few various ways that you can change the cube up to the floor height, because a lot of people, when they start modeling, if they want to start modeling with the cube, they don't like it clipping through the ground, which I agree with. Having like this grid clipping through the thing you're modeling is kind of annoying. So that's just a few really quick ways to get your cube out of the floor. I'm just going to reset its origin to geometry and then press Alt G to put it back. Shift S to bring up the snap radial menu, cursor world origin, everything back in its default settings. Last session, I did a couple more little tutorials using the snap tool to have people snap objects around. I think we'll probably do that right now as well. So let's go ahead and click on our sphere here, and we're going to get rid of it because we don't need it for the purposes of this next demonstration. So we're going to click it, we're going to press X, we're going to select delete selected objects. It's going to get rid of it. Hit N to close this little side window. Click on our cube again. Now I'm going to introduce you to another hotkey. This is for duplicating. If you press Shift plus D, that will keep an offset with your cursor and whatever you have currently selected and create a duplicate. For our purposes, we are going to move our cube a little bit to the side. So we're going to press Shift D. And then before we lock anything in, we'll press Y to lock it to the Y axis. And then we'll press 4 to move it over 4 meters. And then now we'll take this cube, we'll press Shift D again, and then we'll press Z to move it up a little bit, and then we can press 4 to move it up 4 meters, and then bam, now we have 3 cubes. Count them, 3 cubes. Now, as a little demonstration of what we have learned, I want to see you guys, and I say see, but I'm not actually going to be able to see it, but I guess just tell me when you're done. I want you guys to move this cube in such a way that it turns into a little diagonal staircase. Can you do this? That is your first little gar task. Your gar homework is move this cube such that it is the next step in a little staircase here. And then tell me when you're done.
Done. Okay, I'm about to.
All right. Hell yeah. Well, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. If you want to be really precise with it, the best way, in my opinion, is to either type in numbers. If you can do the math, you could just go, I think if I move it up by 2, and then if I move it on the y-axis back by 2, that will put it over here. Correct. But instead of doing that, you could also just have grabbed it. But if you just grab it, you try and eyeball it, it's going to be a little bit hard. However, as we mentioned before, we have the snap tool. So that was my preferred way to do this is I would snap to the orthographic side view by pressing 3 on the numpad. I'd press Shift Tab to turn on snapping, and then I just press G and grab this, and because snapping is on, it's going to snap everything into place nicely. And because I'm looking at an orthographic side view, I know that I am not going to be able to move it in the x-axis because the side view removes the x-axis as an option. And there we go, we have our little staircase. You did it, you rotated the cubes of your mind. Yeah. This is probably where I'm about to close it out for today. The only other thing that I will specifically mention to show you is I did a little example right before ending session 0 last time when I did my little demonstration of it, just to show you that there are still a lot of things that we haven't gone over. So this is all still within just one workspace, one editor. I will mention that all of these other things up here that say layout, modeling, sculpting, UV editing, etc. These are all what are just called workspaces. which is Blender's default layout of editor windows. So even if I go up here and click on modeling, this is just the same thing, but by default, our 3D viewport editor is in edit mode instead of object. If I click on sculpting, this is the same thing, except our 3D viewport editor is on the sculpting object mode instead of just object mode. So like all of these three windows are basically the same thing. UV editing just has a workspace division cut down the center. Instead of just having the 3D viewport here, it has another window that it's opened up and it has opened the UV editor. So like all of these workspaces, although they might seem intimidating because you're like, oh, what the fuck? These are all different. It's literally just, you can hit plus, you can title it whatever you want. And then it's just, we opened a bunch of different editor windows and then just clicked the drop down to change it to something. So even though we haven't gone over what all these other windows are, I want to try and demystify like all of this shit. It's all just windows. Like we could do all of that in here if we wanted to. We could add 50 billion different things or whatever, but like none of this is real. None of it matters. It's all stuff you can open and close at your leisure. It's all just stuff. But the one thing I liked to show people before we closed last time is that like maybe next time we will probably go into the basics of sculpting, but we could also talk about adding materials to things. Like, wow, look at that, it's got orange now, and this one, whoa, we can make it blue. And what if we made it metallic? What does that mean? Whoa, wow. And then what if we change from Eevee to cycles? What does that do? Whoa, it does stuff. Now it looks like it's covered in dust. Anyways, there's a bunch of other things that we can go over, but that is going to be it for today's session 0 of Blender learning. If you have any final closing questions, comments, or concerns, let me know.
I'm okay. I got a good grasp of the basics.
Hell yeah.
The snapping tool was kind of the thing that I was kind of unaware of. So also, definitely, I have to admit that was not the option that I would go for if I wanted to align the cubes. That's not the first thing that it comes to my mind, but it ended up being the most efficient one.
Yeah,
Also,
that's
the one that I can see myself applying in a more complicated scene or whatever. I can put myself to work for it.
yeah, there's a lot of different things in Blender that kind of fall into that exact sort of rhythm of, oh, I do it this way. And then if you talk to somebody who's used the program, they can just go, oh, that thing that took you 4 hours to do, yeah, if you just do Control Alt F9 with your left pinky toe, and then you do 15 Naruto hand signs, roll your face across the keyboard and do a backflip, it's just done instantly. That's all a hotkey for that. And you'll go, oh, I guess I wasted a fuck ass load of time then. That is just the experience of Blender. As you learn things, you'll eventually look back at a thing you did 3 months ago and be like, why the fuck did I do it that way? I literally, like, there was the entire thing that I just manually performed over a series of hours. There is a function that just does that in one click instantly. That's just going to happen a lot as you learn, but that's what I hope to be here to help with, because as somebody who has gone through all of these pitfalls and who has slammed their head into this brick wall over and over, I genuinely think if I just had somebody I could bounce questions off of like, hey, I'm trying to do this, how would you do it? And if they just reply back, oh yeah, hit this hotkey, bam, it's done, that would have saved me so much time. So I want to try and be that for as many people as I can be.
Hell yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, anyways, thanks again. We'll probably do this again next week, probably around the same time, but I'll be trying to do overlapping sessions, maybe a couple a week, just so that people that might not be able to hit one time might be able to hit the other. But I hope you guys had a fun time. I hope you learned some stuff, and as always, if you ever have any questions, feel free to hit me up in the Blender chat in the server.